Thanks so much, Jenny. So as she said, I'm Steve Ballinger from British Future. We host the Windrush 100 network. Last year it was known as the Windrush 75 network when we marked the 75th anniversary of Windrush. And I've been asked to speak about that Windrush 75 activity with a specific focus, I think, on the importance of long-term planning and evaluation. So next slide, please. The 75th anniversary of the Windrush last year was a major national moment. It was marked across all major news channels and newspapers. The King, then Prince Charles, unveiled Windrush portraits at Buckingham Palace. There he is. There were Windrush stamps from Royal Mail, a Windrush coin, televised concert from the Albert Hall. The FA held a Windrush event at Wembley Stadium. The BBC even did a Windrush special of the repair shop. But it could have been quite a niche moment that was barely noticed. It was competing against another big 75th anniversary of the NHS, which had huge resources. Next slide, please. It could have also been divisive. Any discussion of how we mark our history, particularly with regard to race and empire, risked being dragged into polarized culture war political skirmishes. We'd seen this in the polarized public and political reactions to the Black Lives Matter anti-racism protests, the Sewell Review, and footballers taking the knee. Next slide, please. That it had the positive profile it did was a result of many things, and among them were long-term planning, concerted effort to build the broadest possible coalition, ongoing coordination, research to ensure the right framing and messaging, and communications with the right timing to ensure impact. Next slide, please. So planning started in 2022 when British Future's submission to Spirit of 2012's Power of Events inquiry identified the potential of Windrush 75 to bring people together and to communicate an inclusive history of modern Britain. And so building on that insight, we created the Windrush 75 network, open to all organisations that wanted to mark the 75th anniversary in a significant way. Long-term Windrush campaigner Patrick Vernon agreed to chair that, which was really important because he was very well trusted and had a lot of the relationships that we really needed. And we put the issue on the agenda on Windrush Day 2022, a year ahead, in a joint letter signed by 100 prominent voices, calling on all institutions to step up and ensure that Windrush 75 got the full recognition it deserved. Next slide, please. The media attention around that letter galvanized major institutions to join the network alongside the grassroots community groups that had always been doing this for a long time. So by the time of the anniversary itself, we had 500 organizations in the network, ranging from what I call big beasts like the NHS, the Albert Hall, the Imperial War Museum, Royal Mail, through to a lot of smaller community groups like the North Kent Caribbean Network, who are amazing, who had those connections with communities on the ground. The big institutions were very keen to partner with the grassroots groups, and in doing so, they helped bring them profile and resources. Next slide, please. The network met every other month online to share plans, to network, to build relationships between these different organizations. We brought funders in to tell people about funding that was available, and we brought media producers and planners in to tell people how best to work with them for impact. Next slide. Research from British Future also helped to build confidence among organizations that were either too small to have a dedicated communications function, or were new to talking about race and diversity and were sometimes nervous about this new terrain, particularly because of the sort of culture war political arguments that were going on. We did attitudes and messaging research, which was co-funded by Spirit of 2012, and that meant we could show members of the network which messages would connect with the broadest public audience. Next slide, please. And we also acted as a de facto press office as well, connecting community groups who are running fantastic projects with Windrush Generation Elders to national media outlets that wanted to talk to them. That comms expertise, including some pro bono support from an agency that we were able to bring in, meant we knew what the media needed and when, in order to ensure the best possible positive coverage of Windrush Day and the anniversary. Next slide, please. Key to the success of Windrush 75 was knowing what we wanted to achieve from the outset and agreeing this among the network's members from the start. Getting this bit right is the foundation for effective evaluation. And that slide is from the European Diversity Awards, which awarded the network its Community Project of the Year award last year. So on the objectives, we were in agreement that this was about building a broad coalition of support. It was about maximizing reach and profile to ensure that the contribution of the Windrush pioneers got the recognition that they deserved. And also, while the injustices of the Windrush scandal would always be an important part of this narrative, the network members were in agreement that we wanted to tell a bigger story. They didn't want 75 years of contribution to be seen only through the narrow lens of the scandal. So that really helped shape the approach we took and the messaging we used. And of course, meeting regularly as a group helped ensure that we were providing the right support to organizations and responding to what people needed. Next slide, please. So in summary, national moments matter. For a start, in our atomized and often divided society, national moments can bring people together at one particular moment. And I think they might do at 5 o'clock this evening, for example. They often spark rare public conversations about who we are today and who we want to be as well. And those conversations can be positive or they can be negative. If we approach them with intention, we can help to influence that. And I think Windrush 75 shows that with planning and with coordination, you can elevate moments that might not otherwise have had the status that you're able to give to them. Next slide, please. Looking ahead, another 75th anniversary might offer a similar opportunity. 2026 will mark 75 years since the UK signed the 1951 Refugee Convention. A pilot event that we ran to mark the 70th anniversary back in 2021 showed its potential to reach people and tell a new story about the value of refugee protection. Those of us who are keen to defend our asylum protection could seize that as a moment to project a positive narrative about our history and a vision for the future in a way that bridges divides. And if they don't, of course, their opponents might seize that opportunity as well. Some of you may have also noticed that there's a football tournament on at the moment. And of course, that is another way that another opportunity we have to talk about who we are. We've had an intervention today, and I'll put a link to it in the chat, a story about how Euro 2028 in 4 years' time, which is hosted here in the UK and Ireland, could be a fantastic opportunity to celebrate the Black contribution to football and the Windrush legacy for football. Because not only is the UK hosting the Euros, it's also 50 years since Viv Anderson became England's first Black player. Hope Powell, 30 years before then, became England's first Black manager for the Lionesses. And it also happens to be the 80th anniversary of Windrush at the same time. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Steve. Just before we hand over to Jack, I just wanted to clarify in the chat. You can put questions in for the Q&A that we'll tackle after all the presentations are finished, but use the Q&A function, although we have to communicate with you via the chat. Slightly confusing, but please use the Q&A function. And I'll thanks very much, Steve. I'll hand over to Jack, please.
Hello there, I'm Jack Burton. I'm Artistic Director at Jack Drum Arts. We're a social enterprise based in Crook in County Durham. The town has a population of approximately 10,000 people, and several of its wards rank amongst the most deprived in the country in the 2019 Index of Multiple Deprivation. Our mission is to increase access to arts activities and cultural events for people of all ages, particularly those who face barriers to engagement, by delivering high quality, engaging, innovative and transformative arts experiences that promote self-expression, well-being, learning and community cohesion. We do this through community collaboration and we empower our individuals. We support positive mental health and improved well-being using arts and cultural activities as our tool. So our Moments to Connect funded project was called Year of the King. It was designed to celebrate the coronation of King Charles, unsurprisingly, and we planned it in 3 phases. Phase 1, community workshops in visual arts, drumming and dance, and these would be designed to create these would be designed to create content for the parade that was coming. I'll tell you when I want the slide to change. Part 2 is a community parade, which is held in the streets of Crook, our local town, and finishing at the local cricket club, where we went straight into a gala event. And part 3 was the delivery of 2 legacy groups, in which participants would work in a wide range of visual arts mediums to create new artwork inspired by King Charles III and his passions and interests. And all of that culminated in a public exhibition. These photographs are roughly representative of those different phases. Next slide, please. So we wanted to use our position in the local community as a trusted provider of cultural and creative activity to deliver the following outcomes. You can see them here. I'll run through them briefly. People's personal well-being increases through participation. People feel more integrated in society. People feel involved and have a voice in their community. People continue to take part, leading to feeling more engaged in their local community and having a true sense of pride in the contribution they make to it. Number 5, people increase their understanding and tolerance of each other. And number 6, people feel a sense of belonging to a group. You've got some indicative percentages there, and quantitative data is useful, but it only goes so far, and what it doesn't describe is the individual personal experience that each of our participants had. So if you could flick to the next slide, please. I've replaced data with qualitative experience. And I'm going to speak just a little bit about each of these points, and I'll let you read the quotes as I do so. So through a range of evaluative measures, we collected an awful lot of feedback through our participants, from our volunteers and from our facilitators. We also sat in on sessions ourselves as delivery staff or support staff at Jack Arts. And regarding outcome number 1, the project created opportunities for people to switch off from the pressures of life. The cost of living crisis, which is a phrase I absolutely hate, by the way. How can it cost to live? Anyway, the cost of living crisis in particular hit our region really hard during this period, and it was regularly discussed in our workshops, in our legacy group sessions. Point number 2, people feel more integrated. We are event makers at Jack Arts. It's what we do. We put on regular community events each year. People know they're coming round. People expect them of us. So this was just another opportunity for us to create something for the local community and for people to come together and feel part of something bigger. I mentioned how small our town is at the start of this because we are the organisation that makes things happen in Crook. Without Jack Arts there, nothing will happen in the town, in this sense of building a community together and creating a shared sense of identity. Point number 3, our friendly, non-judgmental facilitation style broke down barriers to participation, and our commitment to creating a space for public sharing gave people a chance to feel heard and valued. Number 4, our legacy groups became a source of great inspiration for those people participating and volunteering. They provided a chance to share thoughts, open up about challenges, and support each other. Outcome number 5, the legacy groups were wonderfully broad in their makeup. People felt cared for, respected, and able to share their lives with each other. And number 6, the above outcomes and our success in meeting them ensured that people taking part in Year of the King felt part of something bigger, something collective. Next slide, please. So what have we learned? Designing legacy stages into projects centered around a large-scale public event can help to ensure sustained community engagement beyond the event. They are highly successful at building community cohesion, bringing members of the local community together and fostering a sense of collective identity. Groups that run for extended periods of time offer greater opportunity for camaraderie and the cultivation of a team spirit. Making new connections with other participants had added value when they knew they would meet again regularly. Our legacy group participants expressed a strong sense of pride in their creative outputs. The exhibition grand opening was a celebration of the combined creative journeys of a group of people. Number 2, time is a great resource. Use it wisely and give yourself contingency. We gave ourselves just over 1 month from receiving the funding to starting the project. And that wasn't enough time to do everything that we'd said that we would do. Quite simply, it's really hard to get partners involved in that shorter space of time, especially when they're primary schools and they're working half a year in advance. Try to design and deliver projects with generous time between phases. If you're starting from scratch with an idea, that requires time to gestate, and working with other organizations and partners will always impact the speed at which things can progress. Be as thorough as possible in your preparatory meetings and discuss as much of the project and its aims at any starting point with those you wish to work with. Concerning working with people, work with your partners constructively and empathetically. Every organization has its own unique structures, ways of working, its idiosyncrasies. Being open to an organization's unique circumstance can greatly enhance the impact of projects. For us, working with our main partner organization, which was a Methodist church in the town next to Crook, that really brought a great energy to the project through the batting back and forth of ideas and the opportunity for us as an organization to engage with people outside of our usual participant base. The project would not have been what it was without our really close partnership working. They brought as much to it as we did in that sense. And what really drives projects like Year of the King are its participants and its volunteers. Creative community building projects such as these are nothing without the people who take part. They breathe life into the planning and preparation. We may have had a broad idea of how the project would be delivered, but the substance, the meaning, the relevance, and the fine details were all contributed by the participants and the volunteers. Identifying key participants to work with in a voluntary role to support a group's direction, purpose, and mission is beneficial in many ways, and it can provide some incredible outcomes for the project. We reached a level of connectedness with some participants we hadn't previously worked with that we simply wouldn't have been able to achieve in the time we had without the involvement of our volunteers. They became a link between us and the project, and everything that we intended to do as a part of the project. The volunteers were really crucial in helping us to create the right environment in which people could share their lives with each other. I could reel off so many stories of amazing pastoral support or that sort of thing that I observed during our legacy group sessions. But you can read about it all in our fantastic evaluation report that's on the links that have been shared in the chat. Thank you very much. Next slide, please.
Jack, did you have one more slide? Sorry.
I did, but it just says thank you and it has 2 pictures on it. So.
Yes.
Okay.
They've got a bit of a life of their own, these slides. I'm trying to move it on, but it's
Okay.
not playing ball at the moment.
Thanks very much, Jack. I think if we can probably find a way of getting to the next. Yeah, there we go. Oh, great. There we are. To Marnie and our friends at Neighbourly Lab. going to talk about volunteering in the context of delivering events. So, Marnie, over to you.
Thank you very much. Hopefully we can drive these slides. I'm going to whiz through them as well. We did this time last year, and we were looking at the role of community helpers in the context of the King's coronation. So what I'm going to take you through really quickly, if we go on the next slide, is just a background to what we were doing, a quick whistle-stop tour of our findings and some conclusions and recommendations, which will hopefully be relevant and sound like some of them will be relevant to the projects that you've been talking about, the other speakers have been talking about, and people here will be interested in. And I'm always happy to share this information with you afterwards. So we receive funding from Spirit as well, hence being here, to understand how people across the UK help out in their local community, especially in the context of national moments. What we want to do is understand what we meant by helping out, and do that from the experience of those people taking part, so that we could encourage more people to get involved. So what we did was a mixed methods approach to research. So we did qualitative research, ethnographic research, and some quantitative research. And what we did was, our aim was really to uncover how volunteering organisations could look at volunteer recruitment and their volunteering infrastructure through a different lens, and somehow try to breathe some fresh life into their strategies. And this is because what we know and what we heard were that people, and this is from other work that we've been doing, is that people were interested in helping out. They were really motivated by the concept. And the research was particularly relevant because of the legacy of the pandemic and the cost of living. And so we know, and we were all probably involved in that informal volunteering during the pandemic. And then we know how so many people stepped up to hyper-local support and building new networks. But actually, how can we help this sustain, and what needs to happen and why? Because on the other side of it, formal volunteers, as we all know, has been declining. And organisations were needing to think about how can they get people to give time and think about different ways of recruiting volunteers, because the old structures post-pandemic, we were just not working for people. It was just too much commitment, there's just too many barriers. And then also why this research was relevant is because we know that national moments are heavily reliant on volunteers to be successful, and they're often really place-based and open to anyone in the community to participate in. So it's a really fertile opportunity. So if we just skip a few slides, Jenny, but that's it. Next one. Thank you. So we looked at 3 types of volunteer sort of groups. We made these up. These are not formal groups that you'll find anywhere else, but we looked at community helpers. So those were people who were contributing already and helping out in an ad hoc way. There were the helper aspirers, which were people who were aspiring to help out in their community, like, I really want to, but they aren't currently. And then we've got the formal volunteers, and those were the people who regularly volunteer already, normally for an established charity or organisation. And our argument formed a few key strands, that there is actually a really underutilised help force of current community helpers and helper aspirers, and they could make up that shortfall in formal volunteering. We decided or established that community helpers don't necessarily want to work their way up that volunteering ladder. Therefore, volunteering opportunities that are presented to them just don't float their boat. It's just not what they want to do. They just want to dive in and dive out, do a litter pick, help at an event, and then go. They don't want to have this whole volunteering experience. And as we've heard already from other speakers, that helping out, that participation really does have a positive relationship with their sense of belonging. So if we go to the next slide and think about more about that underutilised help force, we learned from the data that we collected that there are far more community helpers than there are formal volunteers. In our sample of, I can't remember how many, but it was pretty substantial. I think it was over 500, maybe 1,000 people. There were 80% of people who helped out at either the coronation or the big help out were community helpers or helper aspirers, rather than formal volunteers made up 11% of the coronation workforce and 14% of the big help out workforce. It's quite interesting because that's not the perception we always have. And in terms of that, given the decline in formal volunteers, these helpers can make up that shortfall. But what we really suggest is that to mobilise more people, these organisations need to look at their recruitment through the lens of the people who are or could be community helpers. We need to know what motivates them or prevents them from helping out in order to reach more of them. We just zoom on a few more, Jenny. Next one. Oh, that's it. So community helpers also, what's really important to know is they don't necessarily want to work their way up to the volunteering, through that volunteering ladder. Most of them want to help out. Most people do want to help out. They think it's a really good thing to do, but they just can't help out regularly. They don't want to give they do want to give their time, but they don't want to commit to a regular slot, that huge commitment. That need for flexibility means that people's volunteering journey isn't always linear. They don't always want to gain more responsibility, gain more experience, increase their skills. They just want to get involved, do something for their local community, and then go home afterwards or see their friends. They also, what we are saying is here that therefore that volunteering infrastructure needs to be set up so that people can get involved in a flexible way, and organisers need to be aware of that when they're developing and setting up opportunities. Unlike formal volunteers, community volunteers are happy to dip in and out, and they don't want that set time structure. What they're saying, what one person said, I don't want to be overly committed. I want to give my time as and when I can. There could be a few people who are the main organisers that are able to give more time and make things work, and I'm happy to support them, but I don't want to take on huge responsibilities. We also know that helping out has a positive relationship with people's sense of belonging, and that sense of belonging is an important motivator to help people, to encourage people to get involved locally already. So actually, those volunteer recruitment strategies need to highlight that by helping out, people will be contributing to their local place, that it has got that feel-good factor. It's really important. So as we continue the whistle-stop tour, I'll just whiz you through our recommendations from this piece of work. Was that, so what we wanted to do is we wanted to sort of help those organisations that are so heavily reliant on people volunteering. What could they do to learn from what we've learned about these people who want to help out? So the first thing was about focusing on what motivates people to help out in their communities. So what we wanted to do is that people are most likely to give their time to something that they find rewarding, or for an initiative or an activity that they will get something positive out of. Importantly, they might want to give their time to a cause close to their heart and something rewarding or an activity that they find fun. They're not always seeing volunteering as something that's altruistic. It's got something that needs to benefit them and feels valuable to the time they're spending. So finding out and listening to what motivates them is integral. If you just drive the slides, I think a couple more forward, please. Oh, other direction. That's it. Perfect. Thank you. Also, there's something about harnessing efforts to ensure that community helper aspirers can become helpers. There are a large number of people wanting to help out in their community that haven't done so yet. So it's important to find out why they haven't and to take action on that. So it's about listening to those helper aspirers on what needs to be put in place for them to get involved in things in their community, understanding what barriers they may face, which could be time, it could be confidence, it could be other priorities, and try to think about framing volunteer offers to suit those needs. And then think about what can be learned from experiences of current community helpers in order to understand what got them involved in the first place. And it doesn't seem to be sort of as targeted as formal volunteering. And then in terms of the third point, it's about being flexible and accommodating those who don't want to commit. People really do want to give time and get involved, but they don't want to make huge commitments. And they are likely to do that when they are motivated about a cause or an organisation that interests them or links to something that chimes with their values or their sort of immediate family needs. And it's vital that that infrastructure is now set up to support people getting involved in a flexible way. People do get put off if they have to do 10 weeks of training and then there's nothing for them to do for 4 weeks, and then they might have another meeting. They're just like, I'm not doing anything here. I just want to help out. So that sort of flexibility is key to supporting that infrastructure and making sure that volunteering sort of supports the different types of people who want to get involved. And then you think, well, okay, but what about all these lovely volunteers that we still want to include and keep part of our organisations? Well, they're also a really important part of this, but there's also huge value in including them in different ways, and potentially from a managerial perspective, because formal volunteers are more likely to have a volunteering ladder and a pathway that they want to go through and develop more skills. Perhaps we can think about them as supporting community helpers and developing the volunteer help force themselves. Those formal volunteers can sort of get involved in helping those. The formal volunteers can get involved in supporting their helpers to know what they need to do and where they need to go, taking pressure off staff who we know are also extremely stretched. So that is my promise of 7 minutes, a whistle-stop tour of saving the world through volunteering. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marnie, and thanks actually everyone so far who's been brilliant at keeping to time. So no pressure to our last two presenters. Steph, over to you to talk a bit about moving forward to kind of through to legacy.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jamie. Hi, everyone. I'm Steph O'Rourke and I am from Springboard. Springboard is a Belfast-based peace-building organisation that brings together young people from different communities and backgrounds. Young people tend to experience a multitude of disadvantages and live in areas of high deprivation and are heavily impacted by the legacy of conflict here in Northern Ireland. And it's probably worth noting, just to give a bit of context, that our education system here, over 94% of young people and students are still educated separately in Northern Ireland. So for many young people, it's organisations like Springboard or Youth Work later on in life where they first get the opportunity to meet with young people from a different background to themselves. So our project was the Our Lives, Our Legacy project, which used the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. So last year seen the 25th anniversary of what was Belfast's signing of the peace agreement. Bearing in mind, this is still quite a controversial topic here in Northern Ireland across communities. It's not taught in schools, it's not really spoke about, and young people, particularly marginalised young people like who we work with, are often left out of the conversation in relation to the Good Friday Agreement. So whilst there was lots of things happening for the anniversary and presidents coming over from America and things happening in universities, a lot of the young people that we work with were left out of what this meant for them. And not to forget that the Good Friday Agreement at its signing, well, a big part of it was about young people and about their future and about what would Northern Ireland look like in the next 25 years. So it was important for us to kind of use this project as an opportunity and as a platform, use the anniversary as a platform to engage young people who are often left out of this, and to really explore the legacy of the conflict on them and their communities. So the project brought together 15 young people from across the sectarian divide here to participate in a series of development opportunities, really building their own capacity and supporting them to undertake research and then carry out a co-created event to mark the anniversary. So, sorry, next slide, Jenny, please. Thank you. So the event itself was held on the UN International Day of Peace, which is the 21st of September, in an iconic building here in Belfast City Centre called Crumlin Road Jail. And for us, so the event was not the end of the project. The event was actually held in the middle of their project, which was very, very important, which means, which we'll talk about later on, they could continue to build that legacy as young people. So the young people prepared for the event by carrying out a lot of research, having conversations with older members, understanding that this topic was going to be controversial to bring people together to talk about and to kind of remember. They were very, very mindful of this, but it really gave them the opportunity to have conversations with older generations, to people who had voted at the agreement at the time, whether they'd voted yes or whether they'd voted no, and what it meant to them. They brought in different experiences and perspectives and ensured that the audience was going to bring together people from right across the community, which it did. So the event was attended by community members from right across Belfast, family members, community groups, young people and key stakeholders, which was really, really key. There was a lot of people in the room that day that wouldn't normally have sat together, particularly to talk about something like the Good Friday Agreement. So this was absolutely key. It was really powerful. The young people also decided that so this was a youth-led event, so they decided that they wanted to run the event twice to widen reach, to make sure that people who couldn't attend during the day could attend that night. So it really helped widen out who it was going to impact. And the event itself was like an immersive, interactive exhibition across 3 different rooms, which took a look at the past and the lead up to the signing of the agreement, acknowledged that, all of the conflict and everything that happened, ensuring that that was bearing in mind all of the different stories and feelings and also how triggering that can be for people who lived through that time. And then it led into the young people, bringing people together. They used music, they used speeches, and they kind of used the opportunity to have their voices heard where they're not normally heard, and also talk about what they see for the next 25 years and their collective visions and hopes for the future. Next slide, Jenny, please. Thank you. So suppose specific learnings for us was that the fact that it was youth-led, it was really, really important that young people felt that they had the ownership over the event, the ownership over the programme, that they had the opportunity to really, you're already living in a polarised environment, so to really, really have that opportunity to be able to engage key people around what was important to them. And that also then in turn ensured the legacy, because young people had the opportunity to build their capacity to be able to continue to run their own events if they wanted to. In terms of capturing the impact, the young people engaged with so many different stakeholders. They evaluated the event themselves. They even recreated a voting booth, which of the time of what would have been during the Good Friday Agreement, to capture how people feel now and would they vote yes or would they vote no. So it was capturing opinions and thoughts in live time, in real time, of how people feel in terms of that, which was really impactful. And then the young people themselves also developed a theory of change, of what makes this work, which that continues to be a live document that we would use to reflect on what worked and what didn't work, and how do we engage people in a polarized environment in these conversations that can be difficult to have when there's so many different versions of how people feel of that time. So the young people evaluated the event themselves, but they also then ensured that the reach, as I said earlier, was widened to connect in people who wouldn't normally have these conversations. The intergenerational aspect was a key learning for us. It was really, really important that young people felt that they could draw in the older generation into these conversations, considering that a lot of the young people's perceptions growing up are shaped by their older family members in terms of the Good Friday Agreement. And then, as I said, they use things like music to bring people together. So those were key important learning for us that we felt really, really helped and really stood out to make the project impactful. Next slide, Jenny, thank you. So in terms of ensuring the legacy, so for us, what was really, really crucial in this was to continue to build on the event, keep the spirit of it alive. It was only halfway through the project, and that was intentional. It wasn't the end goal, it wasn't the end game. It was just a part of what was going to be so much more. So the young people kept in touch with attendees, they shared feedback from the event, they reached out and let people know what the outcome of the vote was this time around. They kept it alive, and they've also continued to build on it by getting involved in documentaries with local companies, to reach out to decision makers, to keep community cohesion work on the agenda. They delivered workshops in schools to young people, because this isn't a topic that's discussed. So they delivered workshops to their peers across Northern Ireland around the importance of remembering the past, but also moving forward together. They also attended webinars, disseminated their learning through their theory of change, and sharing their evaluation report, which Katie mentioned earlier will be launched in the next 2 weeks. And they're also continuing to build on it by hoping to run an event, which they'll run on the anniversary this year, again on International Peace Day, to kind of continue to build on what was achieved last year. But most of all, I suppose, at the core of all of this was the leadership capacity of the young people. And to echo what Marnie and others have said earlier today, they felt their social connectedness, you know, significant reduction of their feelings of loneliness and isolation. Young people that we were engaging with had never had the opportunity to really be involved in volunteering at events, creating events, engaging with people who they wouldn't normally engage with through museums or different sections of society than where they're from. So for us, it was really, that was at the core of ensuring the legacy, was the opportunity to support young people to build their capacity, to build their skills, to understand how to go about running events, to feel that they actually could run an event, and have a sense of purpose. Through evaluation, there was so many key signs that the young people are feeling so much more engaged in their community, so much more heard within their community, and feeling a lot more empowered to kind of take ownership and to continue to build on that. So yes, that was, I suppose, again, a whistle-to-stop tour of our project. We've been very, very grateful to Spirit and to the Moments to Connect to be able to deliver this here in Northern Ireland, and to see the impact that it's had and what it's created in terms of social cohesion and bringing people together. So thank you everyone.
Thank you, Steph. A great piece of work, and I know it's not just yourselves, but there are colleagues across Northern Ireland who developed some amazing practice in cohesion, or what you would call good relations in Northern Ireland. I loved my visit last week. So thank you. I'm going to pass over to David now, who's gonna round us off.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone. Leaving an academic to speak last might not be a good idea, given how much we like to talk. But seriously, I will keep this to 5 slides, so nice and short. So I guess our project's slightly different because it's in the context of an academic institution looking at bigger picture around about reflections on the role that festival and events, and we've heard about some of these already, can play, especially in the context of equality, diversity and inclusion outcomes. So that's what I'm going to focus upon in the next few minutes. If we just move to the next slide. So just an outline in terms of what we were looking at. I guess we're trying to understand the translation between the kind of macro level policy environment right down into the kind of micro level events and festivals that we focused upon, and how they can be effectively operationalized to help strengthen equality, diversity and inclusion outcomes. And I guess we know there's a lot of policy ambition around about this, and we see it much more that many festival events are looking to engage with an agenda about how they can be more EDI friendly, more aware, more compliant in that more transactional sense, but also in the way in which they kind of facilitate that through the events that they organize. So these are the sort of questions that sort of guided the way that we designed this particular project. And you can move to the next slide. So the approach we took was again reflective of that kind of 3 levels. The kind of macro level, sort of trying to understand the wider national policy environment roundabout and the state of the art in terms of the academic work, which we've done via an evidence review that will be published very soon. We then looked at the kind of meso level, looking at specifically our context in the city of Glasgow, where we are based, and then looked into specific events and communities as part of that too. And two events were the focus, and you'll hear some of those in a moment. The Glasgow Mela, which is a large multicultural event, which actually takes place at the weekend here in Glasgow, this weekend coming. And secondly, a very large sporting event, which took place in Scotland, and focused a little bit on Glasgow too, which is the UCI Cycling World Championships. There's a very big equality, diversity and inclusion agenda at its heart in terms of the way in which it was formed as a large sporting event. And then we looked at those across a range of different methods to try and gather the insights that can inform the work that we're going to reflect upon today. So interviews across a range of, again, macro, meso and micro level groups, observation work and creative artistic work with a number of the events that we've looked at here, in terms of us actually being there and being immersed within the experience that people are having. Post-event work with these 2 large events. And I think even most crucially, probably in terms of the work we did, a series of co-creation workshops that we did with those with lived experience, maybe those that experiencing disability, those from the LGBTQI community, about their experience of the events and festivals taking place in the city. And secondly, policymakers and those with influence have been able to kind of drive forward this agenda through their particular roles. And what we're looking to do, which I'll just mention at the end, is to develop a playbook, which is in design at the moment, which is about trying to kind of provide some clarity and guidance on good practice that can be used by community events, even larger events, as to how to more effectively embed thoughts around about equality, diversity, inclusion within the way you conceive of, plan, and deliver your event. Just move to the next slide. Just want to really focus for the main part of the last couple of minutes on early insights. And I'm very aware that there's a danger of being reductive here. We've heard about a number of projects here in the period we've had, and there's obviously lots more to say. So these are just some of the kind of the key insights I'd like to draw on. What we found from our research, and we've seen this from what people have discussed already in this seminar, is that festival events are complex, multifaceted. They're very different. They're very specific political histories, social histories, cultural context within the cities or places that host them. And we need to be aware of that. But I think for us, we're very key that what we found is that people need to really sort of bake in equality, diversity, inclusion considerations, right from the large sport events that we've looked at, but also kind of smaller events hosted in cities. But that we're aware that that also is limited by the available expertise and resourcing that many festivals and events currently have, and it's a big agenda. So how can we guide and support organisations to be thinking in the right way, whilst they may have limited skills and resources? And that's going to be about sharing the resources and pooling resources, which I can discuss later. The key thing that came out of our project, which I think we've heard again today, is this idea that you have to have the right people in the room. Representation, if you're going to encourage equality and diversity to be at the forefront of considerations around about festival events, you need to have the right people in the room, but you need to have them involved right from the beginning. And that's about your constituency. That's about your community. You have to have those people. So if your event, one of the examples is the Mela, which is a multicultural event, South Asian community focus, then it's absolutely crucial to have the credibility of that community for the programmers, the organisers, and those involved, if you're going to actually achieve some of the outcomes that, for example, the Mela has tried to achieve in Glasgow, which is really to push often quite challenging agendas around about casteism, around about issues of sexuality within the South Asian community. To be able to do that, the credibility of the programmers is crucial. So having the right people there is absolutely important. And that, I guess, also links from the ability to articulate the purpose and vision of the organisation and the festival event to be able to ensure that that's also possible. Space, and we mean by that space matters is in the sense of we shouldn't be presuming that just because an activity is held in a particular geographical location, or we heard from Jack earlier, I think, that the event necessarily will be inclusive and welcome the whole community. So we need to think about unique features of a particular place and a community and constituencies within that space before we can really push forward and progress some of these agendas. Accessibility came up a lot in terms of the kind of concept of not just perceptual accessibility, whether I feel I belong and can join an event, but also obviously physical accessibility, the ability for those living with disability to be able to access a space and be involved. And again, the crucial element that we found from sport event in particular is you have to have those key actors, key stakeholders involved, those with lived experience involved at the beginning and throughout that process to ensure that they can inform and guide, so that you don't end up with a kind of implementation from above. And finally, resources are crucial. And again, we're talking about funded projects here. Many projects festivals, events find it very difficult to access the funding. But human capital, resources in that sense are crucial. The right people with the right background and credibility to push an equality agenda, but also that organisers and the partners can invest in those experiences. Just for the last slide, very aware of time. So what we're trying to do is to try to kind of develop a playbook that helps people to be guided and to be supported. There were some illustrations from various festival events that we've worked with. And that will be looking at 4 key elements in terms of that design. Representation, who's around, who's in the room, how you can inform design and programming through a consideration of an EDI lens. Governance and resourcing, which I think is crucial. How do you have the right principles and manifestos in place? And also, how do you reflect on the learning in each of those festival and events that you run to ensure that you can reflect on improving your EDI perspective. And I will finish there because I'm very aware we want to have enough time to have discussion with the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thanks very much, and thank you to everybody again who's presented. We're going to now take some questions. We've got a few already, but if anyone who was listening has got any questions they want to add in, or indeed one of the other presenters wants to ask someone else something, that's absolutely fine. Please put them into the Q&A. So the first question that we had in was in relation to the politicization of events. So when we are dealing with topics that are sometimes inherently challenging and therefore and political, how do you the question is phrased, how you depoliticize them, or maybe a better way of or another way of phrasing that is, how do you ensure they're still inclusive for a whole community, whilst also recognizing that the sometimes topics are challenging. I'm going to go ask maybe Steph to come in on this first, please. And then from a slightly different perspective, maybe Steve after that. Steph, if maybe I could ask you to come in first, please.
Yeah, and I know I understand people are coming from and that, and it's difficult to get away from, and particularly here in Belfast where there are so many different versions of what happened and what didn't happen, and it can be very controversial. But I think as David was saying around your representation, you need to, as an organization or who you're engaging, you have to make sure that you're representative of everybody, that everybody is included. Whenever we were even creating events or anything that we're putting out or anything that we're doing, we must ensure that it's inclusive of all opinions, that it brings in everybody's perspective, whether you agree with that or not. It's important to engage the people that, I mean, in the Good Friday Agreement, 30% voted no. Those people have often been left behind, not really heard. Obviously, the focus was on the positive. 70% voted yes. 30% is still a high number that voted no. So it's important to engage even those that are on the edges or on the fringes. And despite how people may feel around what they're saying, or they may not agree, it's just important that everything that you do represents everybody, not just slanted to one way or the other. So I think definitely what David was saying around representation as an organization and what you're doing, everything that you're doing, being very, very mindful of that at every stage and how that may affect or trigger people depending on what you say. And it's important to bring in a lot of people around you to ensure that you're doing that, and always be thinking, have you got everybody in the room? Who's not here? Who's not in the room is what we really need to be thinking about.
Thank you, Steph. Steph, just as a follow-up on that, just quickly, have there been situations where you haven't been able to reconcile people's particular position or views and had to move on, and how you go about deciding that?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, we even had some young people who were very nervous about inviting older family members because they were conscious that they may not agree with how they want to see the next 25 years, that they want a shared future. People are still carrying a lot of hurt and a lot of pain about what happened. And, but what we found actually happened was family members ended up coming, and it actually changed their perception. So it had a knock-on effect intergenerationally. We actually had one dad who came on camera who actually said, I actually never would have imagined that I would feel how I feel after leaving this event, that it's actually helped change my perception around what people want. And at the end of the day, it's the young people who have to take this future. So we've definitely had pushback in a lot of the work that we do, not even just necessarily this event. We've had pushback from different members of community, different members of society who maybe just aren't ready to have those conversations yet. And you just have to continue to try your best to engage and make sure that you're being as inclusive as possible.
Thank you, Steph. Appreciate that. And Steve, maybe if you can come in on this. When you were presenting, I particularly thought when you were talking about the opportunity presented by the Euros when they come to the UK, about some of the challenges in relation to Black Lives Matter and football, and just thinking about how we might kind of tackle that moving forward. But any reflection on the question would be really helpful, Steve.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the big concern for us with Windrush 75, I suppose, is that you've got the ongoing injustice of the Windrush scandal and people still fighting for justice. So you couldn't just make it a big party and a big celebration. So we were very keen to use this as a commemoration of Windrush 75, and also just being very inclusive. As several of the other speakers have said, is making sure that Windrush scandal campaigners are in the room and part of those meetings. And actually, Patrick Vernon, who chairs the Windrush network, is a Windrush scandal campaigner himself and knows all of the other people involved. So that was really helpful. Nevertheless, the Windrush scandal was always going to be part of the message, but the agreement within the group is it shouldn't be the entirety of the message, because as I said, people didn't want 75 years of contribution to British society to be entirely seen through this narrow lens of the Windrush scandal. I think what helped was having a very pluralist approach. We gave people advice on messaging, because we did research into public attitudes and we tested messages that were bridging rather than polarizing, but people could say what they wanted. And lots of organizations used the 75th anniversary to raise the profile of their work campaigning on the Windrush scandal. And actually, Patrick himself described it as, he said this is an anniversary is bittersweet. It's sweet because we're marking 75 years of contribution. For a lot of us, we're talking about our parents' contribution, but it's bitter too, because so many people have still been so badly affected by the scandal. And I think looking forwards, we have to be very careful with work on Euro 2028 as well. One of the great things about football is its ability to reach right across society and to bridge different groups. That means it's also reaching people who don't have positive attitudes about migration and diversity. That's fantastic that you're able to communicate with those people, but obviously if you reach that group, then they can take an opinion on what you're saying. And so what we don't want to do is sort of create a massive culture war over an event at Euro 2028 that could be very unifying. So I think getting the messaging right, building the broad coalition of support is really essential. So you've got quite a broad tent.
Brilliant. Thank you, Steve. David, are you going to come in on this question?
Yeah, I was just going to follow up because I thought it was really interesting, the context of it around about depoliticization, because I think from some of our work, one of the really interesting things is that so the Glasgow Mela, which is a long-standing event, is in some ways repoliticizing, because what they've kind of felt has happened over the time is that it's been perceived as a festival of diversity, of all diversity. I mean, within the city of Glasgow, because this started in 1990 with Glasgow hosted the capital of culture, European capital of culture. And so actually the programmers have sought to kind of, not in a very, very political manner, but have sought to try and refocus that on the actual communities that a Mela represents, South Asian community in the city, and used it to platform and debate issues through artistic practice that are actually quite political, really, around about some sensitive and challenging issues that the South Asian community has. And I think that's really interesting, because the city has kind of supported that by literally saying, you know what, you're the credible artistic actors within that space. And you can have those conversations, you can platform certain issues, you can discuss them in an environment where it's not going to be seen as the city trying to kind of, if you like, make superficial judgments, kind of tokenistic kind of engagements. And so I think it's important that we don't forget that politics and events are political in many respects. So it's just how they're done. And I think Steph gave a good example of how that's done in Northern Ireland. It's been sensitive, it's been really intentional and thoughtful all the way through these processes.
Thank you, David. Really helpful. Amy, you're going to come in on this.
I was just going to bring up the Maritime Museum's programme around Windrush, which I think also did this really, really well, of not having space for the teeth or the kind of grittier and campaigning issues. And then also, I think in the British Future polling, Steve, you found that engaging in family activities is one of the most popular ways people wanted to engage with the anniversary. So there was a lot of stuff which was much more celebratory for families as well. And then there's also something about, it's not that one single event, it's a kind of curation of a series of events or a program. And I think that really comes through in Jack Drumm's work. That, Jack, you mentioned you're one of the main anchor institutions in Crook, and having a program event. So maybe this one doesn't speak to you. Maybe, you know, you're a diehard Republican, so the year of the king was not for you, but something that Jack John does will be for you within the space, you know. So I think that kind of curation is also really important.
Thank you, Amy. Steve, you put your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo David's point, I guess, which is just not wanting to polarize doesn't mean avoiding difficult issues. You can engage with contentious issues in a way that doesn't polarize. And actually for Windrush, you know, you're talking about empire. It is a contentious and a polarizing issue. And it's not something that we have a lot of public conversation about. And when we do, it's often very polarized. And a lot of major or big institutions, their first inclination is to duck it and say, we don't want to go anywhere near this. So a lot of what we were trying to do was give them the confidence that actually you can engage in this in a way that isn't polarizing, because you don't want to give all of the space to the polarizing voices. You need to have bridging voices occupying the space and engaging with these issues. Otherwise, all of the share of voice is two warring sides firing shots at each other. And the sort of bridging majority in the middle don't get a word in edgeways. So I think it's really important to have the confidence to engage in issues that can seem contentious.
Thanks, Steve. Really helpful. And it's certainly something that I guess we'd echo in our work at Belong. Obviously, we work on all sorts of cohesion-related pieces of work, including local cohesion strategies, often authored by local councils and other local organisations. And the very best ones are recognise where a place has been and place a moment in the context of time and history. But I think the very best ones of doing that recognise that in times in our history, in the history of that place, we've worked through difficult challenges before. It's not ducking the fact. It's not ducking the fact that it was all great in the past, and including. And I think about where we are here in Manchester. We're a national organisation, but we're based here in Manchester. And what they do here in Manchester, I think, really well is to say, yes, we have had a radical history, but that is because we've had to tackle challenges together. We've had to welcome people from across the world to Manchester and make sure we can live well together. We've had to deal with poverty. We've had to deal with other challenges, and we've come through that and giving people the confidence now to work through the challenges of today. So yeah, I'd absolutely echo that for sure. I'm going to just go on to another question that we had, and I'm going to maybe come to Marnie and Jack on it. It's about involving volunteers in the whole cycle. I know David touched on it, particularly in his presentation, but maybe Marnie, if you could just come in on a reflection on how you ensure that volunteers are included at every kind of point of the process in planning, delivering, and evaluating an event, and building that kind of ongoing legacy.
Thank you. This is more taken from other work that we're doing also with Spirit as a learning partner, rather than the research that we did, because we didn't cover that in this piece of work. But it's all about how it's about not fearing those sticky conversations. You know, Steve was talking about them on a sort of cohesion point of view, but it's actually being open to listening to volunteers from the very beginning and being open to shaping what you want to do with what volunteer needs are, and checking in with them regularly as you go along and ensuring that those lines of communication are open and that feedback is given in terms of how they want to get involved and whether it's meeting their needs. We've just done in fact, I did a focus group just earlier this week. It was a mini group with some volunteers to sort of look at volunteering infrastructure and what are the kind of what's working well and less well. And the volunteers I spoke to have never volunteered before, and they were volunteering at an event, and they said that what they appreciated most is that they kept being checked in with, and so that they felt like they mattered. And they liked the t-shirt, but the t-shirt wasn't the most important thing. It was that you've listened to me, you've taken into account what my needs are. One person had accessibility needs, and they were really looked after by being buddied with somebody else who didn't, and therefore that they could sort of tag team what they were doing in that volunteering space. And they were checked in afterwards really lightly with a text message where you were right, if you've got any feedback for us. But they really appreciated that, because they were able to say, oh, you know, I like this, that, and the other, and this didn't go as well for me. And so they felt like everything had been taken on board. And it wasn't lip service to it. It was proper, like, right, we'll do that differently next time.
Great, thank you, Marnie. Jack, just come in on that question.
Yeah, I'd second a lot of what Marnie said there. It's really important to create a supportive environment for your volunteers. They need to know what they're doing, and at no point in a volunteer's experience should they not have any clue what they're doing, or yeah, there needs to be a real care for their welfare during their time volunteering with you. In terms of Year of the King, how we did that, as soon as we received confirmation of funding, we began planning the initial stages of the project, which are the workshops leading into the parade. We were creating a list of who are we going to need on the day for the parade. That was the main tranche of volunteering that we had in the project, and we needed people who were going to be marshals along the way, who were going to support the artists, who were going to support the young people and the participants. And so it's about creating I love spreadsheets. I created a brilliant spreadsheet that had a list of roles and a list of people that we had in mind. And then it's about engaging with your stakeholders, your participants, finding out who in the community would like to volunteer. For us, we're a tight-knit community, so there's lots of people who we regularly have volunteer, but there are always new people who are around and interested in getting involved. They might not know that the opportunity is there, so it's about opening that up and having a place for dialogue. And then the most wonderful experience of volunteering in Year of the King was there was a participant who came along to the initial workshops with her grandchildren, and she made some of the colourful things that you saw in the pictures to wear in the parade, the crowns or the environmental placards, that sort of thing. I clocked her in the workshops, and I thought, you're really invested in this, and you really want to support your young people, but you're also really invested and enthusiastic about it. Then on the day of the parade, I met her again as she took part. I also met her husband, who was volunteering. Actually, he was volunteering as a marshal in the parade. And we got to the gala event, and then I had a really nice chat with her, and I said, I know what's happening next for this project, and it would be amazing if you would take a lead role in the legacy group phase of it. I've seen how invested you were in those workshops, and I think you would bring a lot to this next phase of the project. And she agreed, thank goodness. And she basically became the filter through which everything for the legacy group phase of the project was funneled. So nothing that the legacy group projects did after that, it didn't happen without her guidance, her consultation, which I think is really important. She chose a lot of the artists, so we worked together to decide the mediums that the group would be inspired by. And she knew people in both of the legacy groups, so she was able to have a really, what's the right word? It was, she was just with it really presently, and she knew exactly what people would need or what people would be interested in the group. Yeah, yeah. Oh, you're muted, Jamie.
Apologies. Thank you for that, Jack. We had a follow-up question, I think, to this subject around how do you know, and there are ways of measuring how valued volunteers are. Anyone got any examples of how they did that? No? Okay. All right. Well, sorry, go on, Amy.
I was going to say, I've put in the chat a rapid evidence review on volunteer wellbeing, which for those of you that really like the sort of detail, that includes a theory of change on volunteer wellbeing. But I think Jack and Marnie's examples were also like how light touch and personal it can be, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, big. It's just about showing that you care, and I don't know that it always needs to be as over-engineered way.
Yeah. Sorry, David. Thank you.
And I was one of the perspectives I was going to share on some of the work that we did, especially our workshops that we've hosted, is that there's sometimes a challenge around about volunteering and about a reliance on volunteers being unpaid in particular. And a number of smaller events and festivals talked about the challenge of actually always having people volunteering or even being consulted with and not being paid for that. So for example, the context of disability, I think, is a good one, where often disability organisations are now asked to contribute based on lived experience and pulling those in, but there is no funding to support that. So there is a feeling, some potential of exploitation in that context, and that. So I think there are bigger debates sometimes about volunteering. Obviously, large events we know are very reliant on volunteering, but I think there is from an equality, diversity, and inclusion perspective, I think we need to again be thoughtful about what are we asking of people. So it might not be so much just in a community event where you're volunteering in your place, in your village or in your town, like we've heard from some others. But if especially those kind of events that may be slightly larger and other, I think we might want to think about what we're asking of people, and especially for consultation.
Brilliant, thank you. I think, bear in mind we've got only a couple of minutes before we end. I'm going to try and wrap us up if I can. So I thought it was thank you everyone for your contributions. Thanks for your questions. I thought it was a really rich hour and a half. Clearly some themes, and we will be writing these up as well and sharing these. So please sign up to the Belong newsletter if you've not already, because we'll be sharing some of this too afterwards. But I think some of my initial reflections were the themes coming out for me were ensuring that throughout the whole life cycle of an event, that we're engaging people on their terms, engaging the widest range of people possible, properly listening to them, and not ducking difficult things that come out of that process, and I think sometimes there's a tendency to think if there's a challenge raised that through this project we have to deal with it. I don't think that's always the case. I think acknowledging has come out several times here as a positive process in itself, even if an event can't necessarily solve an issue that might be deeply challenging. I really liked what Steph said about seeing the event as the midpoint of the project, which I think was brilliant. I also love David's phrase of re-politicization, which I might use several times in the coming weeks. So thank you all. Belong are also working on a wider project with Amy, Katie and the team at Spirit around looking at the whole archive, rich archive that Spirit has of events to draw out learning about how to best plan, deliver and evaluate events to promote greater cohesion and connectedness. So look out for that next year, and it will include a digital resource to help people who are doing it in communities across the UK. So thank you again. Thanks for your participation, and see you again soon.